There is a Greenland shark swimming somewhere in the North Atlantic right now that was alive when Shakespeare was writing plays. Let that sit for a second. Not a species of shark. Not sharks like this one. This specific animal, the one currently cruising through deep, cold water at approximately one body length per hour, which is roughly the pace of someone pushing a shopping cart while reading a text message, was already alive in the 16th century. It was probably born sometime around 1500. It will almost certainly still be alive in 2200, assuming nothing catastrophic happens to it between now and then. Meanwhile, the mayfly that just landed on your window has approximately 1 day left. It was born today. It will be dead tomorrow. It has never eaten a meal in its adult life because it does not have a functional digestive system and has not needed one because its entire adult existence is structured around a single reproductive event that the whole lifespan was built toward. It is, in the most literal biological sense, a delivery mechanism for genetic material that evolved to live fast and die before anything can kill it. One animal lives 700 years. One lives 1 day. Both are successful. Both have been doing this for millions of years. Both represent solutions to the same fundamental problem: how do you stay alive long enough to reproduce? That evolution has arrived at through completely different routes, and that work, each in their specific ecological context, with remarkable effectiveness. The question of why animal lifespans vary so dramatically, from hours to centuries, across species that share the same basic cellular machinery, the same DNA-based genetics, the same fundamental biochemistry, is one of the most interesting questions in all of evolutionary biology. And the answer connects directly to the world that ancient humans inhabited, because ancient humans were embedded in a community of animals with wildly different lifespans, and understanding those differences was part of the ecological knowledge that ancient human survival depended on. Let's start with the evolutionary theory of aging, because it is the foundation of everything else, and it is considerably more interesting than the way it is usually presented. Aging, the specific progressive physiological deterioration that produces declining function and eventually death in most complex organisms, is not a design feature of life. It is not something that evolution built in deliberately. In fact, for most of the history of evolutionary theory, the existence of aging was a puzzle. Why would natural selection allow the progressive deterioration of organisms that are otherwise functional? Natural selection should favor organisms that live longer and reproduce more. Why does aging happen? The answer that evolutionary biology has arrived at through the work of Peter Medawar, George Williams, and subsequent researchers is elegant and somewhat counterintuitive. Evolution does not see aging as a problem because natural selection operates on reproductive success, not on longevity per se. What matters from the perspective of natural selection is how many offspring you produce and how successfully they survive, not how long you live beyond the point where reproduction is complete or no longer possible. The specific implication of this is that genes which have positive effects on reproductive success early in life can be maintained in a population even if they have negative effects on survival and function later in life, because by the time those negative effects express, the positive effects on reproduction have already done their work. This is called antagonistic pleiotropy. The same gene has opposite effects at different life stages, and it explains why specific physiological mechanisms that enhance early reproductive success often produce the specific degenerative changes associated with aging. The lifespan of a species in this framework reflects the specific balance point at which selection for early reproductive success, which may involve physiological trade-offs that reduce later function, meets the ecological reality of mortality from external causes. And this is where the dramatic variation in animal lifespans starts to make sense. Let's talk about the specific ecological variable that determines lifespan most powerfully: external mortality rate. Here is the core evolutionary logic. If you are an animal that, regardless of how good your physical condition is, faces a very high probability of being killed by a predator, by disease, by starvation, or by other external causes before you reach old age, then investing heavily in the biological machinery of longevity is a poor evolutionary strategy. You are building a car to last 100 years, when the statistical likelihood of a crash within the first 5 years is overwhelming. Natural selection in this context will favor organisms that invest their biological resources in rapid reproductive maturity, in rapid reproduction, and in the specific physiological systems that enhance early survival and reproduction rather than the maintenance and repair systems that support long life. The resources available for biological investment are finite. You cannot simultaneously maximize early reproduction, disease resistance, cancer suppression, cellular repair, and longevity. Something has to give. And in high external mortality environments, what gives is longevity. This is why mice live 2 to 3 years and bats live 20 to 40 years despite being of similar body size and similar metabolic profile. Mice are prey animals, exposed to continuous high-probability predation risk from owls, cats, foxes, snakes, and dozens of other predator species. The statistical life expectancy of a wild mouse from causes other than aging is so low that very few mice survive long enough for aging to matter as a mortality cause. Natural selection in the mouse lineage has consequently invested in rapid sexual maturity, large litter sizes, rapid successive pregnancies, and minimal investment in the longevity machinery that would extend life beyond the point where external mortality is overwhelmingly likely to intervene. Bats fly. Their flight capability removes them from most of the predator threats that mice face. The statistical life expectancy of a wild bat from external causes is dramatically higher than that of a mouse. Natural selection in the bat lineage has consequently invested more in longevity machinery, cellular repair, cancer suppression, immune function, because the payoff of that investment is actually accessible in the bat's ecological context. Living longer pays off if you are likely to survive long enough for the investment to produce additional reproduction. Let's talk about what this means for body size, because the correlation between body size and lifespan is one of the most consistent patterns in animal biology, and it follows directly from the external mortality logic. Large animals in general live longer than small animals. This relationship is real, statistically robust, and follows directly from the external mortality argument. Large animals face lower predation risk. The number of predators capable of taking a large animal is smaller than the number capable of taking a small animal. Large animals are also more resistant to many disease pathogens, more able to withstand resource scarcity, and more capable of defending against external threats. The lower external mortality rate of large animals means that natural selection in large animal lineages invests more in longevity machinery, in the biological systems that support sustained physical function over long periods, because the probability of that investment paying off through extended reproduction is higher. The largest animals, elephants, whales, some tortoises, live the longest. The smallest animals, mice, shrews, small birds, live the shortest. The pattern is not perfect, because body size is not the only variable determining external mortality rate. Flight capability, toxicity, protective shells, social defense, anything that reduces external mortality rate, regardless of body size, shifts the evolutionary calculus toward greater longevity investment. This explains the bat anomaly we mentioned. Bats are small but long-lived because their flight capability reduces their external mortality rate to levels more typical of much larger animals. It explains why parrots live far longer than other birds of similar size. Their intelligence and behavioral flexibility reduce their mortality risk. It explains why naked mole rats, which live in complex underground colonies with sophisticated social defense against predators, live 10 times longer than comparable-sized rodents that face normal above-ground predation pressure. Let's talk about the specific cellular and molecular mechanisms of aging, because understanding what is actually happening inside long-lived and short-lived animals reveals something genuinely fascinating. Every complex organism faces the same fundamental cellular challenges as it ages. DNA, damage accumulates from radiation, chemical exposure, and the specific errors in DNA replication that occur every time a cell divides. Telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of chromosomes, shorten with each cell division eventually reaching lengths that trigger cellular senescence or death. Misfolded proteins accumulate in cells, disrupting their function. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Mitochondria, the energy-producing organelles in cells, accumulate damage and reduce their efficiency. Reactive oxygen species, the metabolic byproducts of cellular energy production, damage cellular components continuously. All animals face these challenges. The difference between long-lived and short-lived species is the investment in the systems that manage, repair, and counteract these challenges. The Greenland shark lives 700 years partly because it has exceptionally effective DNA repair systems, exceptionally stable telomere dynamics, and a metabolic rate so low that the accumulation of reactive oxygen species damage proceeds at a pace that makes 700 years equivalent to what 30 years might be for a metabolically active animal. Bowhead whales, which can live over 200 years, have been found to have specific genetic variants in DNA repair pathways and cancer suppression genes that appear to provide enhanced protection against the cellular damage accumulation that limits lifespan in other mammals. Naked mole rats, despite their small size, have extraordinarily effective protein quality control systems and show almost no age-related increase in cancer risk. They appear to have solved the cancer problem in ways that mammals of comparable metabolic rate and body size have not. These are not random biological variations. They are the specific products of evolutionary investment in longevity machinery. Investment that was made because the ecological conditions of these species made longevity a viable and profitable biological strategy. Let's talk about what ancient humans observed about animal lifespans, because the variation in animal longevity was not an abstract scientific question for ancient human communities. It was practical ecological knowledge with real survival implications. Ancient humans who had spent their lives in close observation of the animal communities of their territories knew, from direct experience, that different animals lived for different periods. Not in the precise numerical sense of modern biology, they were not counting years with calendars, but in the practical sense that matters for ecological knowledge. Understanding that a raven could be a companion across decades of your life, that a deer seen this spring might or might not be seen again next spring, that a specific tortoise near the water source had been there since before your parents' time. This knowledge had practical applications. Understanding the lifespan of prey species was relevant to hunting strategy. The management of hunting pressure in a territory required knowing whether the animals being hunted were fast reproducing species that could sustain significant offtake or slow reproducing species where removal of adults had long-lasting consequences. A species that reaches reproductive maturity at 2 years and produces large litters was a different hunting proposition than a species that reached reproductive maturity at 10 years and produced one offspring at a time. The specific ecological knowledge of animal reproduction rates and lifespan that ancient hunter-gatherer communities maintained was sophisticated enough that it constituted a functional wildlife management system, even without the formal scientific framework of modern ecology. Traditional ecological knowledge in indigenous communities, when subjected to systematic study, consistently reveals an accuracy and depth of understanding of local animal population dynamics that took Western science decades of formal study to approximate. Let's talk about the specific ways that lifespan variation across species connected to the ecological role of those species in the ancient landscape, because this is where the evolutionary biology and the ancient human perspective most directly intersect. Short-lived, fast-reproducing species tend to occupy ecological roles that require rapid population response to environmental change. Mice, rabbits, small birds. These are species whose populations can expand rapidly when conditions are favorable and contract rapidly when they are not. Their short lifespans and rapid reproduction rates are the specific biological characteristics that make this ecological flexibility possible. They are the fast responders of the ecosystem. the species whose population dynamics track environmental change on timescales of months to years rather than decades. Long-lived, slow-reproducing species tend to occupy ecological roles that require stability and the accumulation of knowledge or physical resource across time. Elephants, corvids, whales. These are species whose ecological contribution involves sustained individual presence, accumulated individual experience, and the specific social functions that long-lived, experienced individuals serve in their communities. The elephant matriarch who remembers drought refuges visited 40 years ago is providing ecological services to her herd that no short-lived species member can provide. The wisdom of the old is, in some ecological contexts, as important as the energy of the young. Ancient humans occupied an interesting position in this framework. Humans are, for our body size and metabolic rate, remarkably long-lived. Modern humans routinely live 70 to 90 years, and the evidence suggests that ancient humans, when they survived childhood and avoided acute mortality causes, had the biological potential for similar lifespans. The specific human lifespan reflects the same ecological logic as the bat's anomalous longevity. Human intelligence, social organization, and behavioral flexibility reduce external mortality risk to the point where investment in longevity machinery becomes evolutionarily viable. Let's talk about the grandmother effect specifically, because it represents one of the most interesting intersections of human lifespan evolution and the broader question of why long life is evolutionarily valuable. We established in other discussions that post-reproductive female longevity in humans, the fact that human women can live for decades after menopause, which is unusual among mammals, is likely explained by the specific value of grandmothers in providing care and resources to grandchildren. The grandmother hypothesis proposes that the extended post-reproductive lifespan of human women was selected for because grandmothers who invested in their grandchildren's welfare significantly increased the survival and reproductive success of those grandchildren. This is directly relevant to the lifespan variation question because it represents a case where the value of a long lifespan is not primarily through direct reproduction, but through the specific ecological and social functions that experience, knowledge, and sustained social presence provide across an extended lifetime. The long-lived grandmother is not contributing to the next generation through her own reproduction. She is contributing through the accumulated knowledge, the social relationships, the practical support, and the specific wisdom that a long life in a specific ecological and social community produces. This is the same logic that explains the long lifespans of elephants, killer whales, and corvids, species in which old individuals provide specific navigational, ecological, and social knowledge to younger community members that significantly enhances the survival and reproductive success of those community members. The evolutionary value of the long lifespan in these species is not primarily through extended personal reproduction, but through the specific informational and social functions that longevity enables. Long life, in this framework, is an evolutionary investment in the accumulation and transmission of knowledge. The longer you live, the more you know. The more you know, the more valuable you are to the community. The more valuable you are to the community, the more your survival and function is supported by the community. The more your survival is supported, the longer you live to continue accumulating and transmitting knowledge. It is a virtuous circle, and it is the specific evolutionary logic that explains why the most cognitively complex social species, humans, elephants, killer whales, corvids, tend to have longer lifespans than their metabolic parameters would otherwise predict. Let's talk about one more dimension that ties everything together: the relationship between lifespan and the ecological timescales on which different species' ecological contributions operate. An annual plant lives 1 year because the ecological processes it participates in, seed dispersal, pollination, soil enrichment, herbivore feeding, operate on annual timescales. A tree lives centuries because the ecological processes it participates in, forest structure creation, carbon sequestration, the sustained habitat provision for the hundreds of species that depend on it, operate on century timescales. The duration of an organism's life is calibrated to the temporal scale of the ecological processes it participates in. Ancient humans, as apex ecological participants in the landscapes they inhabited, were participating in ecological processes that operated on decade to century timescales. The management of hunting territories across seasonal cycles, the transmission of ecological knowledge across generations, the maintenance of social networks that provided crisis resilience across years of environmental variability. All of these functions required individual participants who were present across substantial periods of time. The human lifespan, long enough to accumulate decades of ecological knowledge and social capital, was calibrated to the temporal demands of these long-scale ecological functions. The Greenland shark, living 700 years in deep cold water, is participating in ocean ecology at a temporal scale that most organisms cannot access. Its accumulated experience of specific ocean territories, specific prey populations, specific environmental dynamics, all of it operates on a timescale that requires a very long lifespan to be meaningful. It lives 700 years because 700 years is the relevant timescale for what a Greenland shark does. The mayfly lives 1 day because 1 day is sufficient for what a mayfly does. The reproductive event that is the entire purpose of its adult existence is complete in hours. A longer lifespan would not produce more reproduction. The resources were all spent on the larval stage that preceded the adult. 1 day is exactly enough. Here is the full picture. Animal lifespans vary because evolution is not trying to produce long-lived organisms. It is trying to produce organisms that reproduce successfully. The lifespan of a species reflects the specific ecological conditions that determine how long an individual needs to live to maximize its reproductive success, what the external mortality environment allows organisms to survive to, and what specific ecological functions long-lived individuals serve in their communities. The mayfly's 1 day and the Greenland shark's 700 years are both perfect solutions to the specific problems their specific ecologies present. Neither is better, neither is more successful. Both are the products of millions of years of evolutionary refinement in specific ecological contexts, and both will almost certainly still be operating in the same basic form millions of years from now. Ancient humans watching the world around them saw this variation, saw that ravens came back year after year while mice were new each season, saw that the tortoise by the water was the same tortoise their grandparents had known, saw that the mayfly was born and died within a single summer day. And the ecological knowledge they built from these observations was part of the sophisticated, nuanced understanding of the living world that ancient human survival both required and produced. The variation in animal lifespans is not random. It is the specific, functional signature of evolution, operating on the specific ecological conditions of each species across the full depth of evolutionary time. Every lifespan is an answer to the question, how long do you need to be alive to do everything that matters? The Greenland shark needs 700 years. The mayfly needs 1 day. Somewhere in between, you are sitting here with approximately 70 to 90 years to work with, which is apparently enough time to watch a video about why some animals get 700.